A disclaimer, the methods and techniques described in this audio program are intended for last-ditch survival use only in the context of a total collapse of society where no other options are available. Many of these methods are dangerous and may expose you to the risk of severe injury or death. Do not attempt to replicate the methods described in this program, except as a last resort where you have no other choice. This information is offered as is, with no warranty of any kind, and the listener of this information assumes all risks associated with any application of the techniques and methods described herein. Okay, welcome to part 2 of the Global Reset Survival Guide. This is Mike Adams, your host. I hope you enjoyed part 1, or at least learned a lot from it. Maybe you didn't enjoy it. That's not my job here. This is not an entertainment channel. This is a survival episode here to help you survive. And I'm working to be as upfront and as transparent with you as possible about the things that you're facing and what you'll need to do to survive those things. Now, for part 2 here, I've switched it up a little bit. For part 2, I'm going to cover escaping the cities and suburbs before the global reset. I had initially planned to do this about survival gear. I'm going to save that for part 3. I think this flows better from the way I wrapped up part 1. So let's begin. The first thing to realize is that you and I, all of us, we are going to go through this time of incredible tribulations, of incredible human suffering, economic destruction, loss of life. The masses who are totally unprepared for this, just completely oblivious, they will experience an incredible amount of fear, uncertainty, and so on. You and I will experience less of that because we have already mentally rehearsed what's going to happen, which is part of the process of preparedness, by the way. But we're all going to go through this, and the only question really is, where do you wish to be when all of this chaos comes down? Where do you wish to be? And think in particular about cities and suburbs versus rural areas. Because the more you understand about the structure of cities, which I've called artificial constructs, the more you know that cities are unsustainable without daily imports of food, fuel, water, electricity, telecommunications, labor, and so on. Cities will collapse simply from a lack of supplies and a lack of sustainability. When systems crater, such as transaction systems, which are based on money and finance, fuel systems, which is responsible for the transportation of food into cities, the power grid, electricity, all these things, cities become uninhabitable virtually overnight. You do not want to be anywhere in the city. And you don't want to be in the suburbs either, because the suburbs are easily reachable from the cities. So when the cities implode, people will spill out to the closest thing around them, which is the suburbs. So even though you might be in a suburb right now and think, yeah, I'm relatively safe, I'm not in downtown. They didn't burn our neighborhood in those riots. You might think you're safe. Oh, we got a good neighborhood. My neighbors are good people, you might say. Really? What happens when they're starving? How good are they then? Because you'll find a lot of people, they really have no morals or ethics because they don't have a spiritual pledge to Christ or God or any religion. And they're going to come steal from you, kill you, whatever they need to do when times get tough. So don't mistake the way people are during polite, normal society with the way people will act in desperate times. And if you happen to be known in your neighborhood as the prepper, you've probably already heard people saying things like, hey, when the stuff hits the fan, I'm coming to your house, right? You've heard people say that. And hopefully you've told them, no, you're not. You're not coming to my house unless you bring something. You bring an AR, you bring some food, you bring medical supplies, you bring a sleeping bunk or whatever. If you're coming to my house, you bring supplies and we'll survive together. But don't think you're coming to my house to get free stuff, because that's not how this works, buddy. Not how this works at all. So don't think that you're safe in a suburb. You probably aren't, depending on what city is closest to you. Like if you're in a suburb of Chicago, forget it, right? Or a suburb of St. Louis, or a suburb of Baltimore, or even Portland for that matter, or Seattle, as we've already seen. These black militant groups, what's it called? NFAC, not effing around coalition. They're already saying that they want to kill white people and establish a new black supremacy nation inside the United States. And they're willing to shoot people to get that done. You think they're going to hesitate to shoot you when the rule of law collapses? No, they're not going to hesitate at all. So the answer to this is, if I ask you, where do you want to be when all of this goes down? The answer should be, I want to be as far away from the chaos as possible. And because the chaos is going to be focused in the cities and the suburbs, the spillover zones, you want to be, number one, more than walking distance away from those areas. Number two, more than bicycling distance away. And number three, more than one gas tank of a car ride away from those cities. Now, what's a car ride away? Well, typically, you want to be a full tank of gas can take a car, sometimes, depending on the vehicle, of course, maybe 300 miles, perhaps on average. Can you get 300 miles away from major cities? Now, me personally, by the way, I'm not 300 miles away from a major city, and it's almost impossible to do east of the Mississippi just because of the population density. But the farther away that you can get, the better off you are. And so part of that is also not just the raw distance, but also how far are you off the main road? Sometimes when I'm driving down the highway in Texas and I see somebody building a really luxurious farmhouse just like 50 meters away from the highway. And I think, you people are fools. You're going to get looted and robbed. You're going to be the first to get looted and robbed. Because you see, when the rule of law collapses and the supplies run out in the city, the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to have recon teams of maybe Black Lives Matter terrorists, looters, gangs. They're going to come out from the cities in vehicles, perhaps motorcycles, perhaps trucks, whatever. And they're going to go to the easily accessible houses, which might be farmhouses that are close to the highways. I mean, how can you think that being close to the highway is a good place to be? Now, so they're rolling down the highway. They're going to hit those houses first, for food and gold, guns, ammunition, whatever they can get. Next are going to be the main roads that come off of those highways, which I would call sort of the primary roads. And then the side roads off of that road would be, let's say, secondary small roads, whatever. The more you get away from the main roads and into the secondary roads and the tertiary roads and the long dead end roads, the more turns people have to make to find you, and the more you get onto a gravel road out in the middle of nowhere, the safer you are. So it's not just about highway miles, it's also about how easy or difficult is it for vehicles to find you, to get to you. And frankly, if you're quite a ways off of the main highways and main roads, you're probably in good shape, especially if your house or whatever it is not obviously evident from the main road, and if it doesn't look luxurious. So one of the things I recommend is, once you live out in the country, number one, don't live in a luxurious mansion looking type of thing because you're going to get targeted. Kind of lead a lower profile, have a home that fits in, and you might throw some junk in the front yard or something just to fit in with your neighbors. If I'm not even joking about that. If you and I'm talking about during the collapse here, I'm not saying do this right now, you'll anger your neighbors, but during a collapse, it's great to look like a junkyard. It really is. This is part of the art of deception, or of blending in, the kind of gray man philosophy. You can throw a bunch of junk in your yard. You can not mow your grass. Don't put a nice car visible from the road, or a nice tractor, or a nice boat, or anything like that. Don't keep up your property during all of this. Look a little bit run down. Have some old farm junk out there. That's actually, see, thieves are assessing your property the way it looks from the road. They're assessing how much money do these people have. Do they seem like an elderly couple? Do they seem like a younger couple? Might they be able to defend themselves? They're going to look for signs like, if you have a little flag out front that says United States veteran or something, U.S. Marine Corps or something like that, or Maybe you're a member of law enforcement, so you have your sheriff's car. I don't know. That might make you a target these days. Who knows? But if you have little signs, things that kind of make people go, huh, maybe I don't want to mess with this place. I don't know, like an angry barking German shepherd in your yard, things like that. Or if you're just hard to find, hard to get to, then that's a really good situation. One of the things that you can do is you can have an old junker vehicle that you use to block your main access road. Now, ideally, you'd want a place in the country where you are several hundred yards away from the road, where you have control over the road that gets to you, and you could block it. And it's easy to block. You can buy an old junker vehicle that still starts. You can buy an old tractor. You can get some old junk piece of equipment that still runs, for a few $100s. And you can just start it up and drive it in front of your gate. Just block it. And what you're doing in that situation is you are forcing people to get out of their vehicles and go on foot to come try to steal from you. And guess what? Bad guys hate going on foot because now they're right out in the open. And you combine that with a mean German shepherd and an armed person, i.e. you, with a rifle who knows how to shoot 300 yards away or more, then you've got people who are probably going to leave you alone. And it's also great not to have an easy back entrance. Like, don't give people an easy way to get to you. So when you're looking for property, there are so many things to pay attention to here, but I like to have a place, number one, where the house is not visible from the road. Number two, a controlled alley of the road that gets to you so that you could block it, or you could guard it. You could shoot up vehicles that are coming down that road. And you can use some military tactics too. You can put curves in that road so you can make vehicles slow down even if they do get through. Put curves in it. And you want to clear the shrubs and trees around it so you can have a clear view so you can shoot them if they're coming at you. You don't want to have a thick forest that they can sneak through and then pop up 20 meters from your house. You want to have a clear view so you have clear fields of fire to shoot approaching people or approaching vehicles. Along those lines, you also want to have a high caliber semi-automatic rifle. If you're big enough to run one of these things, like a semi-auto 300 Win Mag or a semi-auto 338 Lapua, two of my favorite types of rifles, and where you can shoot like 10 or 12 rounds of semi-auto, very high-powered fire that penetrates vehicles and even stops vehicles. I've also got a 50 cal Barrett that stops vehicles. It's just I hate to shoot that thing because it's so damn violent. Even the 50 cal Barrett, that's even too violent for me to shoot. I just don't even like to shoot. It's not fun. It's just it's a little bit of pain to shoot that thing. But hey, in a pinch, will I fire 50 caliber rounds at some approaching vehicle that intends to do harm? Absolutely. And then once I get those rounds off, I'll grab something a little smaller like the 300 Win Mag, empty that, and then maybe I'll pick up an AR and get mobile. It just depends on the scenario. But you want to have a controlled entryway where you can block vehicles or force people onto their feet. And that way, if they do even manage to find you, then they're going to have a hard time messing with you. So that's some really good tactical advice right there about how to set things up. And also, by the way, make sure that you know the ranges from your house to, let's say, your front gate or a certain point on your driveway so that you can compensate in your rifle. You might have an AR-15 with, let's say, an ACOG sight or a primary arms ACSS sight or something. In a lot of these reticles, there are different horizontal hash marks for different ranges. Like you hold the rifle here for 200 yards or here for 400 yards or here you hold it here for 600 or maybe even 800, especially if you have a 308 rifle, something like that. Just know your ranges. And you can do that by buying a rangefinder, and you can go to your driveway and you can use the rangefinder and laze your house and you'll get the range. Oh, here it's 600 yards, here it's 800 yards. And just note that very carefully in your own records. And that way, if you have to engage targets at certain points on your driveway, you know exactly how to hold your rifle in order to effectively hit them. The advantage is your home field advantage there, because they probably don't know the range to your house. So even if they're shooting back at you, they are probably missing because they are misranging, especially if you are raining down ammo on them. You're causing them to probably, make mistakes, which is one reason to engage them first. So at some point, they're probably going to decide, hey, there's probably easier places to mess with, and they're going to move on. Or at least if they still come at you, you've got a shot at engaging them and defeating them before they can do any damage. All right. So getting back to the big picture here, you don't want to be in the cities and you don't want to be in the suburbs, and you want to be in a country, rural location that gives you not only a tactical defensive scenario, some of what I just described, but more importantly, you need to be able to live with a collapsed food supply, a collapsed power grid, and a collapsed economy for an extended period of time. And also, given that the United States of America is likely to break up, we will see secession, we'll see civil war, we may see UN troops occupying certain areas of the country. In my opinion, it's very important to relocate to a red county in a red state. So what I mean is a very conservative county in a very conservative state. That's why, to all my good friends who are living in rural Oregon, East Oregon or East Washington, which are very rural areas, or even Northern California, a lot of good patriots in those areas, or East California, I still believe that you may want to get out, because you're going to be under the control of a Democrat-run state run by treasonous lunatics who are criminals who will drive your state into the ground, and they will no doubt come confiscate your weapons if they can. That's one of the first things they'll try to do, is take away your right to a Second Amendment. And you do not want to end up in the Socialist Republic of California, because that's probably where it's going. Now, some people who live in California are working on splitting California, which I think is a very noble effort, and maybe that's the way it goes. So you might end up in the free California, possibly, or the free Oregon, or whatever happens there. And yeah, maybe that's the case. So maybe there's a reason for you to stay and fight. Maybe the land has been in your family for generations and you're not leaving. I get it. Just be prepared to fight. You're probably going to have to fight hard. You're going to have to be willing to die to defend your land, because you are in areas that are controlled by communist lunatics who want you dead. The mayor of Seattle, the governor of Oregon, the governor of Washington, the governor of California, they want you dead. If you believe in the Constitution, you love America, you voted for Trump, you have a gun, you're a Christian, you own a Bible, they want you freaking dead. And they will send out execution squads to come kill you. So don't have any illusions, because the more systems collapse, then the more the tyranny gets unleashed by these left-leaning governors and mayors and left-wing militant execution squads. Don't have any illusions about that. So personally, I recommend getting to a red county in a red state where you've got good neighbors around you who also own guns, who might be veterans, for example. I live around people who own cattle all over the state, people who are farmers and ranchers, hands-on people. That's the kind of people you want to be around. And frankly, people with ethics. So it's not a bad idea to look for areas that have Christian churches, because whether or not you happen to practice going to church, the Christian principles are, in fact, the principles on which this country was founded. And when they are followed, they are very good principles for living in a peaceful society where people don't run around killing each other, which is what the left is doing, because, of course, they hate God, and they hate the Bible, and they hate the rule of law, they hate the police, all that stuff. So pick an area. Now, in addition to all of that, it's very important, I believe, to have an area that has good soil, because food sustainability is going to be one of the key priorities in all of this. Surviving the food disruptions is absolutely crucial. You're going to need to be able to live on your own for probably 18 months without going to the grocery store. Now, maybe it's not going to be that bad, but just in case, I'm urging people to prepare for 18 months. Now, over that period of 18 months, you'll be eating stored food. You might be doing some sprouting, so it's good to have sprouting seeds. You'll be growing 1 or 2 seasons of different foods, so it's good to have potatoes, so you can put them in the ground and grow more potatoes, which are the easiest thing to grow. It's good to have carrot seeds. You can grow a lot of carrots, you can grow onions, you can grow garlic, A lot of root vegetables are easy to grow, but you got to have dirt. So all these people from California that are moving out to Austin, Texas right now, I happen to know the area pretty well. Austin has no topsoil. It's just a bunch of limestone with about 2 inches of dirt on it. Guess what? You can't garden on limestone. So all these people moving out to West Austin, and there's a lot of them, frankly, in my opinion, haven't done their research. There's no sustainable living in West Austin. You have to use dynamite to blast out the limestone just to have a garden bed. If you go east of Austin, between Austin and let's say Houston, you've got a lot of rich soil. And that's called Central Texas, and that's where I live. And in many areas of Central Texas, even places like Brenham, for example, farming communities all over. And so if you're looking to grow food and you've got questions, or you need fertilizer, or you need a tractor, or you need someone who can repair a tractor, guess what? The whole community has people who do those things. You will find local fertilizer suppliers or local tractor repair personnel. But whereas if you're out in Portland, Oregon, and you try to find somebody to fix your tractor, they're going to look at you like you're insane. They think people who own tractors are evil anyway. So you want to live in a community that has an infrastructure for growing food, which means you want to pick an agricultural area. Make sense? This is why you want to avoid southern Arizona. There's no agriculture there because there's no water. Just drive along I-10 between Phoenix and Tucson, and you'll see it's freaking desert sand everywhere. And even from Phoenix all the way into LA, it's just freaking desert. There's not really much agriculture except in certain areas in the Central Valley of California. So pick an area where there is agriculture, and that can include areas of Utah and areas of certain parts of more like northern New Mexico, or certainly Colorado, East Texas. A lot of agriculture in East Texas, and of course the Midwest, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, and so on. Plenty of agriculture in the breadbasket of America. So pick an area where you've got soil, the ability to grow food, and infrastructure for providing agricultural support, as well as good neighbors. Look for Christians and churches. Look for a red county with a Republican sheriff and a Republican-run state. And this way, when the breakup happens, you're going to end up in an area that respects the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, which includes the right to religious expression, by the way, and the rule of law, is pro-police, pro-military, and so on. This is where you want to be when it all hits the fan. And right away, you'll notice that this limits the states quite dramatically. Now, I'm not an expert on the East Coast, so I don't know where to go there. But in terms of everything west of the Mississippi, obviously Washington, Oregon, and California are all out. Arizona is a little dicey because of the climate. Nevada, same situation. But once you get up into Idaho, a lot of good patriots there. Montana, even though there's too many liberals in Montana these days, it's still overall a good place to be. Wyoming, obviously very, very conservative, but climate is very limiting there. It's cold and it's high elevation, so the growing season is very, very short, and there's a lot of cold wind in the winters. Colorado can be a good choice, but there are too many libtards there who are limiting your ability to own firearms magazines, for example. So you want to get into places like Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, Indiana, not Illinois. You got to avoid Illinois, obviously. North and South Dakota are things to consider, but the climate's cold there. I would not go into Louisiana personally, for maybe I shouldn't say why I'm not interested in Louisiana. I don't want to offend people in Louisiana. There are plenty of good people there, but I just think I think the climate, it's too humid, it's too muggy and buggy, and there's a lot of drug trade in certain parts of Louisiana. New Orleans is going to be a real problem. So that's my main reason there. I'm sure there are good areas in Louisiana. It's just not my top choice. How about that? Mississippi, kind of a similar thing in my view. Kentucky's a good area. North Carolina, a lot of good people from there, and South Carolina and so on. West Virginia. There's a lot of good areas in the south of the U.S. I would stay away, obviously, from Connecticut, Maryland. I would stay away from, obviously, New York, New Jersey. The whole Washington, D.C. area, even Virginia these days, is out of control, thanks to Governor Northam there. So your options in the United States are pretty limited, actually. The good news is Texas is a very big state. It's very big. Land is relatively cheap. There's no state income tax. I'm not trying to get people to come to Texas. There's plenty of people already on the way. Just telling you, make an informed choice. Utah is a great choice too. A lot of people moving to Florida for various reasons. Florida's got Governor DeSantis right now. Good choices there. But you're also in hurricane zone, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere near Miami or Orlando when it all hits the fan. Probably being more on the Tampa side is a better choice. You've got more options on that side. But anyway, that's just my quick overview. You may have a lot more knowledge in certain local areas than I do, but no matter where you go, make sure you're in a conservative county. So even in Texas, I don't want to end up in Austin, Travis County. I don't want to end up in Dallas, Fort Worth, which is run by libtard morons. I don't want to end up in Houston, which is going to be a Black Lives Matter hub of violence and terrorism, right? I don't want to end up in San Antonio. I don't want to be too close to the border with Mexico. I don't want to be in El Paso. There's a lot of important places to avoid in every state. Like in Colorado, you don't want to be near Denver or Boulder. You want to be in some place like Durango. You want to get on the other side of the Rocky Mountains, or go east Colorado towards Kansas, get far away from the lunacy of the liberal cities, because that's where things are going to get bad. Make sense? Oh, and by the way, check your water supply. Those of you who are living in Las Vegas and you're dependent on Lake Mead, you're going to find one day you have no water. Maybe you're already aware of that. And those of you who live in Tucson, Arizona, you're going to find that, you're dependent on this water canal that can easily be, blown up. It's a long water canal that brings the water to the city. Those of you who live in Los Angeles, if not for the power stations producing the power using propane, largely, and natural gas, powering the pumps that are pushing the water over that mountain into Los Angeles, you would have no water. And I ask you, how survivable is Los Angeles when you have no water? And the answer is, it's not survivable at all. Imagine the collapse with no water in LA for just 72 hours. The power grid goes down, no water, total chaos. So there are a number of things you got to look for. And along with that is your water supply. Now, one of the things that's great about places like, Michigan, or even anywhere in the Midwest and places in Texas, because Texas is an agricultural state with a lot of property that used to be a cow ranch, you're going to have ponds. And these ponds, capture water. And the great thing about a pond, or even a stream, or maybe a small creek or something, is that a lot of them will have water year round. And so even if you don't have electricity to power your well pump, you can go out by hand with a bucket, you can collect water out of a pond, and then you can run it through a couple of filtration systems. You'll really need to purify it, of course, because you're going to have giardia, you're going to have amoeba, you're going to have bacteria and everything in a cow pond. You don't want to drink it raw, but you can filter it, you can treat it, you can sterilize it. Even just using sunlight and a water bottle, you can sterilize it. And then you can make that drinkable water. So having access to water is absolutely crucial for what you're doing. Think about the people in the city. Once the water supply stops, where do they go for water? They've got no options. Many people living in cities like, I would say, Phoenix, for example, if the water stops, you don't even know where to go to get water. Maybe you use the water that's still in the tank on your toilet, and that's about it. After that, where can you even walk to get water? I used to live in Arizona. The rivers have no water in them. Did you know that? The rivers have no water. On the map, you see all these rivers in Arizona. I think there's a river in Tucson called the Rito. There's no water in that river except about one day a year when it's a raging flood. And all the rest of the days of the year, there's no water at all. So I don't even know where to go in a place like that to even get water. And that's a bad situation. If you look outside your door right now and you're like, honey, where would we even go to get water if we had to? And you don't have an answer for that. You don't have a pond, a creek, a lake, a stream or something, then you're in the wrong place. So when you're looking for property to acquire, make sure you got some kind of water supply. And if you can get a piece of property that backs up to a creek, that's the best. Because not only do you have the creek as a water supply, but guess what? You also have a defensive barrier that no one can drive through, and it may even be hard for people to walk through. So you've got fewer methods of ingress into your property. It's hard to drive a vehicle across a creek if there's no bridge there, right? So if you've got a partial creek or a partial lake, maybe you have lakeside property, I don't know, in the Ozarks or something. The Lake of the Ozarks is a pretty good place to be for all this, by the way. I forgot to mention that. Southern Missouri, a lot of preppers and survival people there, a lot of Christians there, somewhat of an agricultural community, but very mountainous, very easy to defend because it's very rugged. A lot of shoreline along the Lake of the Ozarks. And if you got the lake on one side of your house, usually the back, then you only have to protect the front because people probably aren't going to come in through the lake. Well, I don't know. I guess they could on boats in the Lake of the Ozarks. But if you have more of a stream behind you, then it's hard for people to cross the stream. So just think about water features and what it means for the defense of your property, just in case things get crazy enough that someone might come out and try to, rob you or something. All right. Now let's talk about the timing of this. There's already a mass migration away from the cities that's underway in America right now. It's already underway. New York City people are fleeing New York. Seattle people are fleeing Seattle for all the obvious reasons. Los Angeles and so on. People are getting out of Dodge. I know people who live in Montana and they're like, everybody's out here buying property. People from California, people from Washington, they're all out here buying property in Montana. Everybody wants to get to Montana for some reason. Wait till they find out how cold it gets there in January, by the way. But nevertheless, they're in Montana. Okay, so property prices are going through the roof. And this is true in rural properties all across America, even in Central Texas. In Central Texas, a few years ago, an acre of land in a rural area might have been $5,000 an acre. Now it's not unusual to be $15,000 an acre. Prices have doubled or tripled. People want to be in rural Texas for all the obvious reasons. So if you're planning on purchasing some country property, obviously the more property you get, the more buffer you have, the more you could control your acreage. But you want to do this as soon as possible, because if you think prices are crazy now, wait until the big collapse comes starting November and moving into next year. At that point, when the cities become absolutely uninhabitable, rural property prices will be, I don't know, I'm just guessing 10 times higher, not just 3 times higher than what they were a few years ago. So they're probably cheap now compared to where they're going. So don't think that you're overpaying now. I think that actually rural real estate is going to skyrocket, especially in Republican states like Texas. I do. I really do. If I were an investor in that, in anything, I'd be buying property all over Texas. I tend to invest in my own company. By the way, I spend money, building platforms like Brighteon or expanding the Health Ranger store operation, things like that. So I don't really have money as a real estate investor. But if I had extra money, I'd be buying ranches all across Texas. Just a word of advice, It's a good place to put your assets. Instead of keeping your money in the bank, we have all this paper money, this fake fiat currency that's going to collapse one day anyway. Why not drop it into a ranch in Texas that'll probably be worth, multiples of its current value in the next 2 to 5 years? I think it's a great investment. Now, talk to your own investment advisors and so on, make your own decision. That's just something that I would do. See, land doesn't disappear. And so when we talk about asset protection, I mentioned in the previous chapter of this, gold and silver and land. Instead of having money in the bank, have money in gold, silver, and land. What's great about being out in the country is the land is beneath your feet. You're living on it. It's very hard for your land to vanish. Your bank account can vanish. You can wake up, log in to citibank.com or wherever you bank, and it can just say, there's no more access. Sorry. Your dollars are history. There's nothing you can do because it was just a virtual asset. You don't really control it. A friend of mine, Steve Quayle, says, if you don't touch it, if you can't touch it, you don't own it. That's his slogan. Well, when you live on a piece of land that is the asset, you're walking on. It's beneath your feet. You can touch it. It's dirt. It's soil. It's terrain. It's trees and grass and wild foods and maybe deer and turkeys, wild hogs, I guess food you could harvest if you were a hunter. It's water. It's ponds and rivers and streams and lakes and all the different things that bring you water. It's space. It's space to grow food. It's space away from the city. This has inherent value because human beings are physical beings as well as being spiritual beings. Everybody's got a physical body, right? Every physical body needs shelter. Shelter requires space. Space is land. Land always has inherent value. And, except for the volcanoes in places like Hawaii, Earth isn't making any more land. There's not a bunch of new land available every year. So you can't go wrong investing in land. Now, long term, when 90% of the population is killed off, by the way, land will, of course, plummet in value. You won't care at that point because you'll just be happy to have survived. Land's going to get real cheap again. But between now and then, land is going to get very, very expensive until a lot of people starve and die. So it's a good investment in the short term, and it certainly is better than leaving your money in the bank and watching it disappear. So to summarize so far, if I were looking for a piece of land to move out into a rural area, and don't forget bandwidth, by the way. You want to be able to have bandwidth access, which sometimes can be tricky in rural areas. A lot of areas use point-to-point radios for bandwidth, which is perfectly fine. But you want to look for soils so you can grow food. You want to look for water availability. You want a conservative area, in other words, a red county and a red state. You want people to have morals and ethics, so look for a Christian community. And you want an agricultural community where it's normal to, for example, have a 500-gallon diesel fuel tank in your driveway. If that's not normal in the area you're considering, you're in the wrong area. It should be normal. You should see cows. You should see tractors. You should see fuel tanks. They're usually painted red in people's driveways. You should get a country vibe when you're driving around that area. And you'll probably see a lot of patriotic things, like maybe some Trump signs, maybe some American flags, maybe some come and take it flags, things like that. Those are signs that you're in the right area. If you see signs for Joe Biden, you're probably not in the right area. So keep going on down the road till you get to the right area. Definitely check out state gun laws, property taxes, things like that to make sure you can live there long term. And of course, if you can buy a place that already has a house on it, it's going to save you a lot of headaches in trying to build a place. It's probably not time to build a place before everything falls apart at this point. Okay, let's cover a couple other things. Let's cover microcaching here and how to survive FEMA trying to raid your country farmhouse. FEMA likes to come take things from people. FEMA is basically a terrorist organization that pretends to be a federal aid organization. And FEMA is part of the depopulation regime. According to people I've interviewed like Celeste Solom, FEMA will basically round people up who are starving. They'll offer you free food. You just got to come to the FEMA camp. And in order to qualify to get into the FEMA camp, you have to be vaccinated, number one, and you have to turn in your guns. And then inside the FEMA camp, they determine who's pro-America and who's anti-America. The people who are pro-America are led to a different back room, and then you are decapitated with an actual guillotine. And this is not metaphor. I'm telling you exactly how FEMA is going to process people. If you are anti-America, then you will be saved, and you'll be put in a labor camp situation. You'll be like slave labor until such time that FEMA gets additional orders of what to do with the slave laborers. But they're going to kill the conservatives and Christians right away. And they're going to vaccinate you with a euthanasia shot, which will probably kill you anyway long term. And they're going to turn you into slave labor. FEMA is not your friend. If you end up in a FEMA camp, you have effed up. You have utterly failed. If you have no food, you've run out of food, you're starving, and you think, let's call up the FEMA camp. Let's hop on the FEMA van and go to the FEMA camp to get free food, and they'll have good, safe medicine and vaccines for us there. You might as well just pull out a revolver and shoot yourself first, because FEMA is probably going to end up killing you anyway. So you want to avoid going to FEMA. FEMA, by the way, even when FEMA isn't killing people, it's just a giant scam. what they do. We saw this in the 2011 fires in Central Texas when the fires burned all these areas out. Basically, FEMA came in with all these contractors that were paid all this fraudulent money to cut down a bunch of trees that had been burned, and there was all this fraud and kickbacks and skimming, and all of Central Texas was overrun with FEMA contractors from all over the country, and it was a total corrupt fraud system. Everybody was getting kickbacks, and the FEMA decision makers were getting kickbacks. And they just like rolled into town, collected a bunch of government money, cut down a bunch of trees, and then left town. That was the whole operation. FEMA, this is the organization that came up with the black mold FEMA trailers after, I think, Hurricane Katrina, where they take all the people and stuff them in these trailers where you die from black mold inhalation. You know, this is FEMA, where somebody got a multi-million-dollar kickback for building these trailers that were unsafe to live in. Yeah, that's FEMA for you. So even when they're not chopping off heads, they're still screwing up people's lives. You do not want to be in FEMA. In fact, if you end up in FEMA, you've made a major mistake. And the way to stay away from FEMA is to have your own food. But you see, FEMA wants to come to your ranch and take your food. They want to steal your stuff. FEMA goes door to door in these national emergencies, and they make lists. They make lists of who's got what. You know, your seeds, your cattle, your food supplies, grain, all this kind of stuff. And then they have the federal authority, if you believe in that, to take your stuff. And this was actually an executive order under Barack Obama, signed in 2012, I believe. I forgot the name of it, but basically it says that FEMA can come confiscate your fuel, your tractors, your cattle, your grain, your food, just about everything they want. And so part of the way to stop them from doing that is to hide your stuff. So this gets into micro-caching. So FEMA might come to your door, especially during a collapse time, and they might say, oh, we need to feed the people down the road. What extra food do you have? And they might demand to come look through your cupboards and look through your kitchen, look in your garage, look in your basement if you have a basement, look in your barn, and they're looking for food. They're looking for stuff to steal from you. Basically, FEMA is looting. So I always say it's a good idea to have a little bit of stuff that they can loot, like old expired food. I always have an area of expired food in the barn, just in case you want to come take a bunch of old moldy flax seeds or whatever, go for it. And then I have the actual food that's going to keep me alive, which is hidden. You can't find that. I mean, unless you want to spend days looking around and digging around and I don't know, you're going to have a hard time finding it. And FEMA, the people aren't that bright. They just want to kind of check the checkbox and move on down the lane to the next place so they can say they confiscated as much food as possible. So give them something, have like decoy supplies to give them, but have your real stash hidden away, very hard to find. Even in your house, if you have a basement or you have a room, you can build a false wall. Behind the false wall, you can have a bunch of buckets of food. I mean, even something like, 12 feet wide by 3 feet deep. You can build a false wall inside a room, put a bookcase in front of it, something like a secret 007 hidden door, whatever. And, you click a button or click a latch, you can open that bookcase, get behind it. Obviously, I'm not doing this. Otherwise, I wouldn't tell you this, but I was talking about stuff. I've seen videos on YouTube, people making like hidden rooms and things. And then you can put a bunch of buckets back there, buckets full of wheat, and you can get a wheat grinder. You can make your own wheat and bread. You can do a lot with buckets. You can store quinoa, you can store beans and rice, all kinds of things, oats, sliced dehydrated potatoes and everything else. And you store all this in hidden places while you have some stash that you're ready to give away, just in case they come for you. Now, if you have a big enough piece of property, you can do micro-caching on your property, which typically consists of buying PVC tubes, like a 6-inch tube or an 8-inch tube, cylinder. And then you put caps on both ends, you waterproof it, and you stuff that tube full of things like, I don't know, rifles and ammo and silver coins and whatever you want in your little treasure. And then you go bury that out in the yard somewhere. And then in order to dissuade metal detecting government thugs from running around with metal detectors finding your stuff. You go to like a garage sale or some kind of flea market, and you buy a bunch of old forks and spoons and nuts and bolts and metal scraps and nails and screws and crap like that, and you scatter that all over the place. Now, this is not a great idea if you have a riding lawnmower with tires that might get punctured. I'm not talking about that. You don't want a bunch of nails out there if you got kids running around barefoot, obviously. I'm talking about an area where you want to have a decoy of a bunch of scrap metal all over the place. I think it's awesome to go buy one of the old hay rakes. And the hay rakes have these rake tines, and those tines break off all the time. They're pieces of bent metal. And you can take a bunch of old tines and just scatter them around all over the place and bury your stash underneath the hay rake machine, And so if the FEMA morons are out there looking for your stuff, they're just going to be digging up forks and spoons and bolts with their metal detectors until they get too hot, and then they'll just go home because they're not going to spend all day out there looking for your stuff. And the more acreage you have, the more fun this becomes. You can bury stuff all over, 500 acres. They're never going to look for that stuff. They've got no time for that. You can have stashes here and there. You can have above ground stashes and below ground stashes. You can have above ground stashes too. This can be as simple as having an old pickup truck. Trust me, an old pickup truck with like a junk old refrigerator in it laid down. And then inside that refrigerator, you put some sealed 5-gallon buckets of food that's kind of weather resistant, heat resistant, that'll store for a few years. And you just drive that old pickup out there and just park it, half a mile from your house, and probably nobody's going to ever see it. Let the weeds grow up, spray paint the pickup, make it look like it doesn't even run. There's some old junk refrigerator. And believe me, FEMA people aren't going to run around digging through your junk pile. Not when they can go next door and probably find stash more easily. So it's very useful to think about how to hide stuff. So I encourage you to go online and look into micro caching. And there's a lot of ways to hide valuable stuff. I've talked about this before. You can even, for example, let's say you have gold. Let's say you have a lot of gold. You're a wealthy person. You got $1 million in gold, and you're scared about somebody finding your gold bars. Well, you certainly don't put it in a safe in your bedroom in your house, because guess where FEMA is going to demand to go first? They're going to say, take me to your bedroom, open your safe, show me what's in your safe. And also a thief is going to do the same thing. So if you open your safe and you've got all your gold bars there, I'm sorry, you're an idiot. You shouldn't put gold bars there. Gold is waterproof. It doesn't oxidize. It's very easy to bury and hide. It's weather resistant. That's one of the nice things about gold. And one of the best tips that I ever learned was, if you don't mind destroying the shape of it, you can melt it down. You can build a mold in the shape of a wrench, like a tool, a big wrench for working on trucks. And you can pour your gold, melt it down, pour it in. Maybe you have a friend who's into metallurgy or whatever. Or you can buy books about this. It's pretty easy to do. You just got to make a hot fire and have some fireproof gloves and everything. You can melt down your gold bars into a liquid, pour it into the mold of the wrench to where you have now a golden giant wrench. And then you spray paint it the color of a wrench. You spray paint it like steel looking color, gray. And then you just put it in your barn with your other wrenches. That's the safest place. They're not going to come steal a bunch of old tractor wrenches probably, And then if you ever want to take the paint off, it's very simple. You just use paint thinner and your gold is fine because your gold is inert. You use paint thinner on the gold wrench, it's not going to hurt the gold. And now you have your gold. And you can melt it down into new bars or whatever. Gold is gold. It's worth its weight in gold, come to think of it. It's perfectly fine. You can make gold into all kinds of shapes. And the same thing is true with silver, of course. So there's a lot of clever ways to hide things. Lots of clever ways. And I'm not going to get into all those ways right now, but think about what other people would avoid. What do people not like to dig through? And the answer is like dirty stuff and smelly stuff, frankly. So if you've got if you've got some animals, maybe I have a chicken house And that thing gets pretty stinky sometimes, before I clean it out. And not that I have hidden anything in my chicken house, but it wouldn't be a horrible idea to hide something under the chicken house, and have a way to get to it, a little compartment on the side or something. People don't want to dig through smelly things and dirty things where there's cobwebs and black widow spiders, or anything that takes too much effort. So when it comes to micro caching, there are a million ideas, a lot of great ideas, but just don't store all your valuables in your safe in your master bedroom, because everybody goes there first. I know a lot of people, people think it's safe to have your valuables next to you at night. So they tend to put like their gun in the master bedroom closet, right? It's a classic thing. You have your gun, it's up on the top shelf in the closet in your bedroom. Now, and if you're listening to this, you're like, oh my God, that's exactly where my gun is, then it's in the wrong place. Or, you've got your jewelry in your master bedroom, you've got your safe in the closet in the master bedroom because you want it close to you. And that's where the thieves go. That's where the government agents go. That's where they confiscate everything. I don't have anything valuable in my bedroom. You want to come to my bedroom and rifle through my underwear and socks, go for it. You're not going to find anything valuable in the room. Especially since the gun that I normally keep in there, I would have already used to try to prevent you from getting there. But if you manage to kill me and get to my room, you're just going to get loads of free underwear. That's it. You want anything more valuable? You're going to have to work for it. You're going to have to hunt. You're going to have to bring in a team of metal detectors and dig through all kinds of crap over many acres. That's a lot of work. So how to be confiscation proof is to hide your stuff. And by the way, if the government outlaws gold, then the government has become the outlaw. You should not turn in your gold. You should hide it. Why do you think the government wants to outlaw gold? Because they're trying to steal it from you. That's why, just like as happened previously in the United States of America, and it will happen again. All right, for this section, I want to talk about using deception to make it look like your place has already been looted. You may wonder why you would want to do this. Let's say you're in an area where there's actually a lot of traffic coming through, people trying to rob you. Maybe your neighbors have been robbed and looted or shot at, whatever. So you can use some deception and decoy techniques. And one of the things that you can do is make your place look like it's already been burned out and looted. Now, I understand this is not going to be pretty. So it might be a last-ditch tactic. But here's what you do. Make sure you're stockpiling some black paint and go online and look at photos of houses that have had fires. And you'll notice that there's black smoke marks coming out of where the windows are. What you can do is you can paint those in place above your windows and make it look like there's been a fire there. And then, I don't know if you've ever been to a house fire, but often there's a bunch of crap all thrown all over the front yard after a fire, and everything's been soaked with water hoses and so on. What you can do is you can go out to a garage sale or a yard sale or just acquire junk, and you can throw it all in your front yard. I know, right? Your neighbors are going to love this tactic. But again, we're talking about an absolute collapse of the rule of law. We're talking about a very desperate situation. So you throw a bunch of crap all out in your front yard to look like you've already been looted. And then most importantly, the main room where people would enter into your home, you have to trash it. So you have to knock over, the cabinets, throw the dishes on the floor, turn the tables over, cut open your couch, as if people were looking for things that were stuffed in your couch. Just basically trash your whole front room, okay? And then you want to set perimeter alarms, which could be strings attached to mouse traps that set off cans, just to alert you with noise. Or you could have motion sensors if you still have batteries or electricity that set off lights or sirens or whatever. And you're actually living more in your bedroom area, let's say, where you could hide there and hope they go away, or you could respond, but you'll have some kind of alert so that you know that someone is there. And often what will happen is if someone's coming to your house and it looks like it's been burned up and maybe there's cracks in some of the windows, maybe the windows have been boarded up, except you leave a little gap where you can look through them for observation. And there's a bunch of crap out in the front yard, and then they break in your front door, which you might pre-break anyway, and they come in and your house looks totally trashed. A lot of people are just going to move on. but you're still living there with your loot hidden behind a secret wall in your bedroom with your AR-15 and your night vision gear, and you're actually doing fine. When all this is over, all you got to do is clean up the yard, clean up the living room, and repaint your house. You're fine. It's all just theater. I mean, heck, the globalists are using theater all the time. What do you think the George Floyd thing was? So you can use theater to survive as well. So it's actually good to be able to appear weak. This is, Sun Tzu, art of war. Appear weak when you're strong. And it appears like everything's already been destroyed. Everything's been gutted. But you're actually doing just fine. You're just in a different area of the house. And you're well armed and you're willing to defend yourself and so on. So keep these deception things in mind. You might find it's even worthwhile to go buy a junk car from a junkyard. You can get them for like almost free, $50. And you can have them deliver it to you. That might cost a little more. Put it in your driveway. And I'm not saying to do this if this violates local laws. Your local fire marshal may not be happy about this, but remember, I'm talking about the collapse of the rule of law. Set fire to that car. Just set the whole thing on fire. So you have a burned out car in your driveway. You got a bunch of junk in your yard. Your front door is broken. Your house looks trashed. And it looks like your house had a fire. Believe me, people are just going to say, there's nothing left here. Let's move on. I mean, FEMA's not even going to come in and mess with you at that point. They're going to say, let's just move on. So there are a number of things that you can keep in mind in terms of the art of deception. You don't want to look strong. You don't want to send signals where people think, oh, this house has tons of food and tons of ammunition. You don't want to send signals like that. You don't want to look like a barricaded bunker castle type of thing, because that's going to attract people who think that there must be something inside that's worth fighting for. It's better to just make it appear that there's nothing left here. It's already been looted. It's already been burned. And there are a number of ways, to achieve that. The art of deception for survival, camouflage. It's very important. Even as a person, when you're walking around, I don't know, some barter flea market or something during the collapse, you're walking around, you don't want to look like a wealthy person. You don't want to look like you're well-fed. Bob Griswold, a friend of mine I've interviewed many times, he says you should go to a secondhand store and buy clothes that are too big for you so that you can appear to have baggy clothes. Why? Because during a collapse, people are starving and losing weight, and everybody's got clothes that are 2 sizes too big for them. If you are wearing clothes that fit you, then you automatically stick out as someone who has a lot of food. So you might buy clothes that are too big for you. And you want to dress down, you want to look impoverished. And the other advantage of having baggy clothes is it allows you to hide bigger guns. So you can have, you want to have at least a primary weapon, but usually a secondary weapon. With baggy shirts and so on, you can carry 2 weapons on your waist, 1 on each side. You can even carry a lot of subguns under your armpit, by the way. You can carry things like, what is this here? The SIG canebrake MPX 9mm. You can carry that under your armpit with a big baggy shirt, especially in the winter where you have a coat. So there's a lot of things you can do in terms of the art of deception. Just keep all that in mind. Along those lines, and kind of a final thought here is, don't have a high-end Mercedes parked in your driveway if you're trying to pull this off. You want to have an old beater pickup truck. You want to have something that fits in. You want them to think you're a poor farmer who just didn't make it. Really, you want to have an old beat-up vehicle. And fortunately, you can acquire those pretty cheaply, usually just a few $100s. The more rust, the better. Just buy them on Craigslist, a few $100. You don't even have to pay the tax because you're not going to drive them anywhere. You just got to park it. Well, maybe you have to pay sales tax. I mean, you don't have to pay the license tax. You're not going to drive it on the roads. You just park it on your property. Maybe you set fire to that at some point. Again, with disclaimers, be safe about it. Don't burn your house down. I'm talking about the collapse of society here. These are desperate measures not to be used during normal times. By the way, you set fire to vehicles, weird, bad, dangerous things can happen. So you should be mindful of what you're doing. Gasoline is explosive and tires blow up too. And there are a lot of toxic fumes from burning seats and things. Again, I'm giving you this information because this is we're talking about a collapse here, a total collapse. We're talking about survival. These are not things I recommend you do during normal times at all. Again, your local fire marshal will have a fit just from hearing this recording, but your local fire marshal is going to be out of a job in this scenario that I'm describing, because the whole county is going to be broke probably. The whole thing will be a collapse. And personally, if I have to set fire to a vehicle in order to achieve the full camouflage deception to be left alone, then I'm going to set fire to a vehicle. I'll pump the gas out first. I don't want any gasoline in it. I'll let all the air out of the tires. Probably, I don't want air pressure exploding with burning bits of tire rubber. And I don't know, maybe I'll remove the seats or something. I'll set fire to it, let it burn out, have a bunch of water ready, wear a face shield, keep a safe distance, all that. And I got to tell you, these are big disclaimers here. Don't sue me if you set fire to a vehicle and something goes wrong. Well, I guess you won't even be able to sue me because the whole legal system won't even exist anyway. So you're on your own, but only do this at your own risk. Okay. A lot of these things are that way. I suppose you could hurt yourself digging a caching hole in the ground. You could hurt yourself with a can of spray paint on a ladder. So I guess, everything in this program is at your own risk. Okay. Let's say that you could hurt yourself trying to shoot intruders, obviously. If you have the gun pointed the wrong way, whatever. Work to be competent in this and practice some safety mindedness during all of this. Remember, the whole goal here is to still be alive at the end of this. so try not to blow yourself up when you're doing all this stuff. just a word of advice. I don't know if you can get these anymore, but there are also sort of pepper spray grenades. You used to be able to get them. And these are handy to have in your house if there's bad people who are coming into your house, like in your living room, and you've got a good way to lock a door and be safe. You can chuck a pepper spray grenade into your living room and fill your whole house with pepper spray, and that will cause them to exit. And then you might not have to engage them in your house. You might be able to engage them outside. But there are lots of ways to get people out of your house. That's one of them. The other way is to just start shooting at them, or just shoot them dead, and then they're no longer a problem. You'll have the advantage of knowing your house and your property, and I strongly encourage you to get some night vision gear, which I'll talk about in the next chapter here, and practice navigating your house and your property at night using night vision. Because one of the things that you'll learn about wearing night vision is that your depth of field of focus is very poor. It's bad. Even if you have binocular night vision and you do have some depth perception, you don't have everything in focus all at the same time. If the distant things are in focus, then the close-up things are blurry. And so doing fine manipulations with your hands, including, by the way, aiming a pistol or reloading a pistol or reloading a rifle while wearing night vision is very, very difficult. It takes some practice. And so you want to be able to navigate, walk around, move around, fire a pistol, fire a rifle, wearing your night vision, because that's a skill that might save your life. And I'll talk about that more in the next chapter. But I think I've covered the overall, escaping the cities. Yeah, I think I've covered where you want to be and some, kinds of tactics. Oh, I do need to cover one more thing, which is how to survive if you're stuck in the city. I will cover that before we move on to the next section. Okay, I promised to talk about how to survive if you're stuck in the city. And the best way to describe this is to think about being aware but homeless. The way to survive a city, if you have to move around in the city, or even if you have to move around in an apartment building, for example, is you want to look certainly not wealthy, not beautiful if you're a woman, you don't want to have new clothes. You want to look homeless but alert. So by looking homeless, what I mean is unshaven. If you're a woman, try to look like a bag lady. If you're a man, try to look like a homeless vet, but not crazy and not someone who's on drugs. You want to look alert but impoverished. And the reason you want to look alert is because you don't want them to mess with you. And the reason you want to look homeless or impoverished is because you don't want them to think there's anything of value in robbing you or forcing you into your apartment to hand over your supplies or empty your safe or what have you. So anytime you're walking around in a city, whatever you're engaged in, try to blend in, have some baggy clothes, clothes that look like almost what a homeless person might wear. You're certainly not well off. You're certainly not well prepared, but definitely hide, if it's legal, hide a firearm under those clothes, or hide a knife if it's legal. Be armed, because being in a city is the most dangerous place you can be during all of this. And if they decide to target you, you're probably going to be in bad shape. So you want to be not a target. And if you're a woman, especially in a city of almost any age, you always have to be aware that in a lawless society, there are evil men who want to rape you. And even if you're a man, like a young man in a city, there are evil, especially Democrats, liberals, they're into raping men for some reason. I don't ask me why. I don't know. I don't understand their weird criminal demonic habits or whatever, but they're into raping men and women, and of course children as well. So you want to look really impoverished. If you're a woman, obviously don't wear makeup, have your hair messed up. Basically, go for the bag lady look in a city. Seriously, in a collapse environment, this is what you want to do. Now, the second thing you want to do is you want to have a pry bar. And a pry bar is something that you can use to pry open locks or gates or latches. When you are in a city, you're in a concrete prison, a kind of trap, a maze of latches and doors and locks. And you will find that if you have to move through a city in an emergency, you're going to have to break through gates, break through windows. Maybe you're trying to escape someone who's pursuing you. Maybe you are trying to simply escape the city, just to get out of the whole city. You're going to need some basic tools, and some good tools to have include portable bolt cutters. And I've seen some of these that are foldable. They're still pretty heavy. It's not like something you can put in a purse, but you should have a set in your apartment in case you need them. They can cut padlocks and they can cut small chains. So get bolt cutters and then a pry bar. I've seen some really good titanium pry bars that are used in the construction industry. You can hide these on your person. You can pry open locks and latches and things like that. You can enter buildings or even vehicles. Another good thing is to have a glass shatter device that allows you to shatter the window of a vehicle, so you can enter a vehicle for shelter or evasion, or maybe you need to hotwire a vehicle to escape some horrible thing that's happening in your city. I don't know. But have these tools available. Now, you can also go online and buy lock picks, but frankly, they don't work the way they work in the movies. I have a lockpick training kit that allows you to learn how to pick simple locks and then move up into more and more complex locks. And picking locks is actually a lot more difficult than the way it looks in the movies. And depending on the lock, you may not be able to pick it at all. So it's not like you just walk up and stick in this metal shim and then in 3 seconds you've picked a lock, like Matt Damon did as Jason Bourne. It doesn't work that way. In Hollywood, it takes 2 seconds to pick a lock. In reality, you might spend 2 minutes trying to pick that lock and never get anywhere. And if you don't have a lot of practice, you're going to suck at it. So don't even bother with lock picks unless you're going to invest the time to actually acquire that skill, which takes, frankly, probably a few hundred hours to get good at lock picking. But there are other things that you can use, such as pry bars and bolt cutters. I don't recommend shooting at locks with pistols, but I do know people in the military, they would shoot bolts off of doors or the hinges using 12-gauge shotguns with special rounds, like slugs, basically, where you could shoot the bolts off doors with 12-gauge. But there's quite a considerable risk of blowback and ricochets and shrapnel when you do that. I mean, it's not often a wise thing to walk up to some metal object and at point blank range just blast it with a 12-gauge unless you're wearing serious eye protection. You're gonna get some shrapnel, and it's gonna make you bleed. So keep all that in mind. And I'm really not a fan of people who think they can just shoot locks and make them work. I don't know if you've ever tried to shoot locks. It doesn't work that you don't just fire at a lock and then magically the door opens. You might fire at the lock and jam it locked. Just shooting the lock doesn't always make it unlock. That's another Hollywood myth. So, learn about these myths, learn about reality, but have the good tools that you need to move throughout a city. There are also, if you know somebody in military and law enforcement, you can buy portable torches. They're actually basically torch cutting devices that are used for entry by law enforcement. And you light them up and you can literally just torch your way through solid metal. Typically only law enforcement has those. And if you do use them, you will attract a lot of attention. But I do know some police teams, some response teams that deal with drug dealers, like raiding drug dealer houses and such. And they'll have these in their kits so they can torch their way through somebody's hard lock. It's a good tool to have. It's a lot more quiet versus blasting somebody's door with a firearm. Speaking of firearms, it is a good idea to have a firearm in your city if it's legal for you to have one. If it's not legal, you're in the wrong place. You should probably exit that city as soon as possible. But I figure you're stuck there because of some other reason. Maybe you have a family member in a nursing home or something, and you have to be there in the city. I don't know your situation, but have a firearm if you can. More importantly, have a suppressor if you can. And for this reason, depending on how big you are or how big your hands are, this is why I really like 45 auto as a round for handguns, but it's usually for bigger people who can control the recoil. But you can also just get a very big gun to have less recoil and get a suppressor that you can fire the 45 auto through. And because the 45 auto is a very high mass round, it's usually a subsonic round by default. So you could say typically all 45 auto cartridges, or bullets as people say, are subsonic rounds, which is important because 9mm is always supersonic. So 9mm is louder. Even if you have a suppressor on a 9mm pistol, it's still pretty darn loud. It makes a big cracking sound. It's, again, not like in the movies where it's quiet. In the movies, like, in reality, it's like, it's a big cracking sound from a 9mm. But a 45 is very, very quiet. And that's why one of the things that I have in my own personal defense is I have a Glock, I think it's a Glock 21, set up with a 45 extended capacity magazine with, I think it's an Osprey suppressor with raised night sights that are suppressor height night sights. And that way, if someone is coming at me and I need to have a handgun type of response, I mean, I've also got a rifle set up in 300 blackout with subsonic rounds, things like that. But if I have to use a pistol in response, then I can grab this 45 auto pistol and I can shoot very, very quietly, which is not only important for not attracting attention, it's also important for protecting your hearing. I don't know if you've ever shot a 9mm gun indoors without hearing protection, but it will make you permanently deaf in many cases. It will cause permanent hearing damage, and that's no joke. I mean, your ears will be ringing so much that you can't hear what else is happening around you, so you lose the sensory acuity that's necessary for your situational awareness. Whereas if you're shooting a suppressed 45 without any hearing protection, because you probably don't sleep with ear protection on, I would imagine, then you can still maintain your hearing. You're not going to suffer hearing damage. You can, you've got situational awareness. So consider a 45 auto. I'll get into more details about that in the gear section of this whole report. But a 45 auto with an extended magazine for a Glock, I think it holds like, I don't know how many rounds, 25, 30 rounds. It's a big, long magazine. I mean, it's crazy. It's longer than the gun. It looks insane, but it's it's really funny looking. But it's one good way to respond in a city. Maybe it's illegal for you to own a rifle. I don't know. Maybe you live in California, but you could still have a pistol, So this is one way to do it. Remember that there is roughly about a 7 to 12 month wait time on the ATF to acquire a suppressor currently. So if you don't already have a suppressor, you might be behind the curve on that. That's why it's always a good idea to get more gun stuff ahead of time, because when when it comes time that you're going to need it, there might be a lot of demand for it. There might be a long wait period. Everybody might be out of stock, So it's a good idea to get those things in advance. And lastly, if you're stuck in a city, make sure you actually have an escape route that you could use on foot with a go bag that you can carry, and that you have a route on a map, a physical map with a compass and some navigation points. And it's not a bad idea to try that out, or at least portions of it that are safe to do so, on foot in advance. If you had to bug out, last ditch, bombs are dropping on your city or something, and you really have to get out, and you've decided that there's no more, you just can't stay there. If you stay, you're going to die. How do you get out of the city? Vehicle is going to be a very dangerous way to go because the roads are going to be controlled and blocked. You're going to have hijackers and all that. How do you get out on foot? And especially, how do you get out on foot at night? Do you have night vision? Do you have a PVS 14 monocular? Do you have a thermal FLIR scout device? Do you have a binocular night vision equipment? Do you know the route? Do you have flashlights? Do you have a red flashlight so you don't light up the whole city with a bright, 2000 lumen pocket flashlight or something? Do you have a way to get out? Do you know east from west? Do you know how you're going to cross the rivers? What are the crossing points? Do you have food and water ready to go? Do you have a portable water filter so you can get fresh water along the way if you run into a river or a pond or something? What's your plan? And packing out enough food and water and gear to walk out of a city like Los Angeles, that's a very serious thing. Not a lot of people can do that, not without dying in the process. So this is why I say the best strategy is to get out of the city in advance of all of this. The city's the last place you want to be when all of this hits the fan. Unless you just really think you can hunker down and fight off the zombie mobs. Maybe you can. Maybe you've got enough ammo. Maybe you've got enough water storage. Maybe you've got enough buddies and you can put up a fight. And maybe you can take control of your apartment building and lock it down because there are very few entrances and exits. So maybe you can have a safe building and you can ride it out. That's definitely a possibility. I'm not saying you can't do that. Just be ready to bug out if it comes to that last ditch plan. You might have to. All right. And remember, the police aren't going to be on your side. The mayor's not on your side. 911's a joke. You're going to lose cell phone service. You're going to lose power grid. You won't have air conditioning or heat. You won't have lights. And you probably don't have a yard if you're in the city, so you can't really grow food, or you can't engage in micro-caching, hiding of your supplies, So your options are very, very limited. And basically, cities become uninhabitable, just impossible to survive very, very quickly in these scenarios, which is why you don't want to be there. Try to survive LA without water. Try to survive Houston without air conditioning. try to survive Baltimore without a power grid. It's not survivable for most people. It's going to be bad. The one good thing about a city is you can have short range comms that work, even little family radios like FRS radios or whatever, little hiking radios, and they'll work in a city. You might be able to communicate with people on other floors, people in other buildings, people a couple of blocks away. So you could coordinate some kind of neighborhood watch program pretty well. If you've got some good neighbors who have some good weapons, you could set up a pretty good defensive perimeter by watching outside your buildings. If there are mobs approaching, you can shoot down at them from an elevated position, which gives you a lot of advantages. You can also control the limited number of entrances to a building. You can control the stairways. You can disable the elevator, things like that. So you can really control who comes and goes. But again, you're also stuck in that building yourself with whatever food and water and ammo that you have stockpiled. And that can run out very quickly, especially if you're providing food and water to a bunch of other people in the same building who have not prepared. So, you got your neighbors who are suddenly coming to you. They need food and water, and they didn't prepare anything. So your supplies, what are you going to do? Supply the whole building? That's not going to work for very long. So unless you happen to live in a building full of preppers, which is very unlikely because preppers wouldn't live in the city, then you're going to run out of supplies pretty quickly. And then you're going to have to exit the building. Once you exit the building, now you're vulnerable to the zombie mobs on the streets. And that's where you're going to want to move around at night and blend in, look like a homeless person, things like that. So good luck if you're in the city. I don't recommend it. It's not the way to ride this out. You'd be much better off in the country where you can spend your evenings in a hammock watching the stars while the cities burn. Much rather be in the country. But that's about it for the second report here. The third report coming up next is about gear. It's how to gear up to survive the Great Reset. I'll talk about specific gear, comms, firearms, night vision, specific food supplies and food prep equipment, portable stoves, water filters, iodine supplements for anti-radiation treatments. What else? Oh yeah, first aid and wounds and things like that. So that's coming up in the next report. Don't miss it. Thank you for listening to this one. I'm Mike Adams, the Health Ranger. There's much more yet to come.